It was nearly 10 p.m. when they finally released Grant from the office. The joys of being salaried. He stopped in one of the bathrooms on his way out to pee and saw Henry from marketing brushing his teeth at the sink. He'd seen him around late a few times before, but for the first time the thought occurred to him that the man might have been living there. He stepped out of the elevator alone into a half-dark lobby, stomach swelling with free pizza. The older folks all rolled their eyes, and he knew he should resent it as well. But there was a part of him which he kept deeper down, that hoped he would never be so jaded that he couldn't enjoy a pile of company pizza. It occurred to him that his older coworkers might also simply have older and more hostile GI tracts, which he also hoped never to emulate. The street was empty, like an abandoned movie set. No taxis at the curb. He would have to walk, at least the few blocks to the train station. The loud echo of his shoes on the deserted concrete filled him with a nameless unease. He could still remember the first time he felt this way. Like he could feel the soldering happening inside his skull as his brain was forcibly rewired over a course of weeks or months. His first job, 16, the idea, and he soon confirmed the reality, of showing up at a place he did not want to be for 8 hours and then going home empty-handed with nothing to show for it for 2 weeks filled him with an existential anguish. Is this forever? At 16, 2 weeks is an eternity. What did next Friday have to do with all the things he would rather have been doing in that moment? At least when he did chores at home, he ended up with the actual dollar bills in his hand when he was done. He could see with his eyes that the bed was made and the grass was cut. Once he'd assimilated the 2-week schedule, he was able to tolerate the amount of time he gave to his various jobs, time which was no longer his own, with a degree of relative internal harmony, for a number of years. Sometime in his early 20s, he realized that, slowly but surely, a bunch of discrete expenses had somehow congealed into an amorphous blob, which somehow now consumed almost the entirety of his paycheck, so that his bosses might as well have not even put his name on the check. They might as well have saved everyone the extra hassle and wired the money directly to the cable company or the phone company. Now he was forfeiting almost all of his time and seeing nothing for it. He was simply allowed to keep living. All he had to do was give them most of his life. Now, he supposed, turning down an alley he was fairly certain would take him closer to the train station. Being salaried was only the contractual formalization of these conditions. Once you've named your price and come to terms, you're theirs, never off the clock. The assimilation was complete. He had become the job. And moreover, it was still just that, a job. He hated meeting his girlfriend's friends and having to explain what exactly it was that he actually did. He nearly screamed when a man approached him from behind a dumpster. He hadn't been hiding. Grant just hadn't seen him. "Excuse me, sir," he said. For some reason the phrase put the hairs of his neck standing on end. "I'm trying to put together enough money for a bus ticket. Is there any chance you could spare me $8? "I'm sorry, I don't have any cash." Grant avoided the man's gaze, did not slow his pace. Heard him grunt and mumble something in passing. Grant glanced back as slyly as he could manage. The man was standing in place as if he were giving him a chance to recant. He was on the wrong street. The environment in which he now found himself struck only a passing familiarity in him, but he could certainly not turn back now. he would have to go around the block. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate your generosity." The man spoke as if Grant were still standing where they'd first encountered each other, his back entirely turned to where he was now. Grant hurried away, trying desperately not to appear as if he were hurrying. He missed dearly the traffic and noise and throngs of other people with other places to be, many already other places in all but body with their phones pressed to their ears. Even the plainly apparent cattle-like nature of the whole ritual was a comfort. If they were going to the slaughter, at least they were going together. All the busiest lunch counters were apocalyptic in the streetlight dark. Somewhere far, far away, an ambulance leapt into action. He found the city around him transformed, or perhaps revealed by the night. It was not hostile. It was simply indifferent. The entrance to the train station was set into the sidewalk, the mouth of the tiled cave glowing with a surgical ward fluorescence. Grant stood at the precipice, peering down into the depths. There was some sort of subsonic dread emanating from the pit, burrowing an ulcer into the deep recesses of his stomach. Something terrible was waiting for him around the corner at the bottom of all those stairs. Or, more likely, the only thing waiting for him down there was a train ride and the chance to be home before midnight. He still had to work in the morning, after all. He took the first step, half expecting the fear to abate once his rational mind had established dominion over the situation. It did not. The further he descended, the colder the fear grew which gripped his soul. He heard the train coming, first in his chest. If he missed it, he'd be waiting down here for at least another 20 minutes. He ran. Nobody lunged for him. The train doors swooshed open as if to greet him. He entered and picked out a seat. He was glad there was nobody to witness how long it took him to decide. The train picked up speed. Grant slumped in his seat and stared at his reflection in the black window. They'd not been moving long when the door at the rear of the car opened. Without looking, Grant felt whoever was moving through the car pause at his seat. The wheels squealed on the tracks. Sparks. "Excuse me, sir. Can I trouble you for $1? "No, I'm sorry. I don't have it." They did not move, and their expression did not change. In fact, Grant noticed they were blocking his row. He pretended not to notice. Eventually, after a long sigh, the beggar moved along. Soon the front door opened, and when Grant allowed himself to look, they were gone. But their face was imprinted on his memory. Slack, utterly devoid of expectation. Eyes dead to the world, but piercing, burning like an old star or the orange tip of a spent matchstick at the back of a deep cave. The station was empty on his arrival, and if there were any other aboard, none alighted there. Above ground again, he found himself a 5 minutes' walk from home, and in a part of town where one rarely saw the homeless. Not that Grant was nervous, but it was something to consider. More trees here, an occasional breeze. He'd only gone a couple of blocks, and already he felt the fear leaving him. His back ached, and he realized that he'd been clenching his entire body from the time he stepped on the train. He walked, and even the air tasted a little fresher. His thoughts wandered, and soon he was only a right turn and 3 blocks from his house. At the corner there was a pastry shop with a striped awning, and from the charcoal black shadows beneath, just as he rounded the turn, emerged a ragged and wrinkled old woman, swaying bent at the waist and tapping at the sidewalk with her walking stick. She held out a rattling tin cup, and Grant stiffened upright in an instant, nearly screamed. She said something to him in Swahili, which he did not understand. "Quarter, please," she said. 25 cents. "No," his voice echoed off the storefront. Please, I just..." He held up his hands as if to excuse himself for his inability to finish the sentence, and began to walk away. Her face was so calm, he thought, and he almost remembered a trace of a smile. Or was she smirking? "You've seen me before," she said. He stopped. "You'll see me again." The creases that lined her face were so deep that she appeared bulbous and ancient. "It won't be good for you. If you deny me, it will be worse." He locked the door behind him and spent several minutes at the front window, watching the street in the direction he'd come from. He saw a cat dart from underneath a car to cross, but none else. He double-checked the lock and went upstairs to wash for bed. If he could keep the shower under 5 minutes and fall asleep promptly, he could still eke out a solid 5 hours. It was only Tuesday. He awoke several hours later, well before the dawn. There was a knocking echoing in his head, and he was not sure if he'd dreamt it or if it had been what woke him. But the longer he lay in the dark, the more sure he became that someone had knocked on his front door and was currently waiting on his porch. He lay there for a long while, with his head on the pillow, listening, blinking in the dark. And then he rose silently from the bed and went downstairs in case he was right. He made it no farther than the landing of the stairs. 4 more steps and he'd have been in view of the front window. He could not remember if he'd pulled the shade down. He often did not. He never checked. For nearly 20 minutes he listened so intently that if there had been another knock on the door, he'd have had a heart attack. Then he fell asleep on the landing and woke in the morning to the sound of birds.
Come all of you good workers, good news to you I'll tell of how the good old Union has come in here to dwell.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
My daddy was a miner and I'm a miner's son, and I'll stick with the Union till every battle's won.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
They say in Harlan County there are no neutrals there. You'll either be a Union man or a thug for J.H. Blair.
Which side are
dirty scab, or will you be a man?
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Don't scab for the bosses, don't listen to their lies. Us poor folks haven't got a chance unless we organize.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Filing cabinets full.
Which side are you on?
Michael McDougal owed $24,000 in credit card debt. He had racked up another 16 in funds owed to various bookies, legal and otherwise. By the time his father died, he had racked up nearly $200,000 for himself in medical debt. Michael inherited the house, which was worth $85,000 if he was lucky. The $60,000 he owed in student loans rarely even crossed his mind anymore. If he won the Powerball, maybe he would indulge them. His sister made something in the range of $90,000 a year. He looked up her job and apartment online. She'd already paid for their father and mother's funerals. Michael sometimes had trouble sleeping. He took long walks around the neighborhood late at night. It didn't help him sleep, but it was something to do. The state of his parents' house, now just his, sometimes frightened even him when he would return and force him to spend a second at the end of the footpath, steeling his nerves before braving the thicket. The grass had grown so long that he wasn't even sure how to cut it with a standard lawnmower. Vines grew all over the windows and the roof, and several densely packed leafy trees hid the lot from the sun almost entirely. It was an easy place to fall asleep at 6 a.m. and wake up at 3 p.m. But there were still nearly 6 years left on the mortgage. He'd managed to scrape the payments together for a few months, but you can only keep so many plates spinning in the air for so long. Eventually you drop one, you lose a bad bet, or several, and more plates fall. He knew that the bank would only tolerate their calls going straight to voicemail for so long. Some of his other creditors, he knew, would not do him the courtesy of a phone call. The first time someone knocked on his door, he hid. And when the man eventually left, he began seeing how many of his belongings would fit into his car. A week before their wedding, Michael and his ex-wife sat down with a bottle of wine and made a list of all the things that their parents did in their own marriages that they hated the most. She did not want to emulate the way her parents seemed at this point almost to lead entirely separate lives, like comfortable roommates. She didn't think her father had any friends. After another glass of wine, she confided that she suspected her mother of cheating on him. She was deathly afraid that she would end up becoming a mother to Michael, whom he would occasionally sleep with. He did not like the way that his parents' own lives had essentially, seemingly ended when he and his sister were born, the way they'd devoted all of themselves to their children. Children were important, sure. Who could deny that they needed love? But it does both parent and child a disservice for the adult to take leave of all adult pursuits and ambitions and live entirely in a world of brainless cartoons and dry Cheerios forever. To become so invested in a t-ball game that they can hardly have any more perspective on it than the 6-year-olds on the field. And then grow old and bitter because their own life didn't turn out how they'd planned, and resentful because their kid isn't fulfilling all of those dreams in their stead. She said he was being cynical. It depressed her when he was so cynical. He couldn't make judgments like that until he'd held a child of his own. It might change your calculus, she said. Maybe the baby would not be a repository of his dreams deferred, but would in fact become the dream. Maybe he'd want to sit on the floor in Cheerio dust watching the same kids' shows over and over and over again. Yeah, he said. Maybe. He found a quiet enough parking lot a few blocks from the city library and parked in a patch of shadow to pass his first night in his car. He was several inches too tall to lay fully extended in the back seat, and though it may not be so awful at first, might be comfortable even to crink your knees only a few degrees, after several hours you are going to want the option of straightening your legs out all the way. The simple fact that you cannot means that you must. Nobody bothered him that night, though he had difficulty falling asleep, and every now and then footsteps, and once, to his terror, a shadow, would cross through the parking lot or down the sidewalk, and Michael would listen with rapt attention each time, thinking always that someone was to be knocking on his window imminently. In the morning the windows were opaque with his breath, and he was shivering. He swiped his armpits with deodorant and spit mouthwash into a nearby sewer and made for the library. He didn't know what exactly he would do there, only that it was a place he would be allowed to exist for a while, where nobody would demand that he cough up a rent payment for occupying the small sliver of the universe that his body inhabited. In the morning, he filled out job applications, and then he went outside and sat on a bench beneath some trees and ate the peanut butter sandwiches he'd packed for lunch. In the afternoon, he wandered between the shelves, stopping now and then to skim a few pages of anything that caught his eye, or to reread some or another passage he half remembered liking from a book he read years ago. The sun was low in the sky and turning very orange, and the windows were casting long, crisp shadows across all the dignified old cherry-wood shelves, when a black leather book, sitting somewhat alone, drew Michael's attention. If it had been thicker, he might have mistaken it for a Bible. The Path, in small gold print etched into the leather, by Fisher Pax. It opened to a white page containing a line-drawn illustration, some sort of rune or sigil. He could not tell if it had been printed or drawn with a pen. On the following page, it simply began. There was no information about any publisher. Pax began with a passionate recitation and rebuking of the many ills he saw around him in contemporary society, the crimes of the capitalist state. Then he began to describe, in the finest of detail, a city of the dead, flowing like a river beneath the streets, shuffling along in parodic silence beneath the feet of the businessmen and commuters. He described a sort of apocalypse in which all of the dead rose to meet the living, only they weren't zombies or anything like that. And in fact, we were meant to see that they are fantastically human, maybe even more recognizably so than the people in the suits shuttling mechanically to and from their work. He was nearly halfway through the book when the librarian tapped on his shoulder. They were closing in 5 minutes. Her eyes were kind and gentle. There were many things Michael wanted to say to her, but in that moment he found it enough of a task just to keep his heart from running out of his chest, and so he just nodded his head and said, "Okay." He found a parking ticket on his car when he returned. He ate another peanut butter sandwich and drove until he found another dark parking lot and bedded down for the night. He finished reading The Path, and then, having nothing much else to do, he read it again, and fell asleep sometime after midnight. When morning came, he trekked back to the library, where he was both elated and terrified to find the librarian with the green eyes and canted smile at the front desk. "I'm back." He hoped she'd remember him, but she did not seem to. "You kicked me out last night at closing," he said. "Oh, sorry. 9 to 9. Right. Well, Back, she nodded and smiled. Oh, he removed the path from his bag. I actually wanted to ask you about this book I found. Where? Here? Doesn't look like it. She turned it over and flipped through the pages. Not one of ours. It was on the shelf, he said. Do you have any more by that author? Typing. I don't see anything, I'm afraid. Oh, well. Thanks anyways. He repeated his routine from the day before, but as he was leaving to eat his lunch, the librarian flagged him down. Her name was Katie. I looked up that author you were asking about, and you'll never believe what I found. Turns out, Fisher Pax is actually Luther Ludlow. He stared at her blankly. Luther Ludlow, the horror author? Doesn't really ring a bell. Oh my goodness! She took his hand then and whisked him off to a dusty back corner on the 3rd floor where very little sun ever reached. Ludlow had 4 shelves to himself, and Katie began pulling books down. Desert Dark, that was his first real big hit. It's still a lot of people's favorite. It's a classic. He hardly heard what she had to say. He was too busy remembering what her hand felt like in his. Warm, small, a little clammy, and so soft. This one's more recent. The Critical Moment. He collected newspapers from all over the world, and whenever he saw a story about a murder, he'd write a whole chapter about it in the book from the perspective of the killer. It was pretty controversial at the time. It actually ended up being his last novel. Everything he's written since then has been nonfiction, true crime. He said that this book convinced him that there was nothing he could come up with that would be scarier than what people can do to each other. Of course, he hasn't written anything in almost 10 years. There's a rumor that he's dead. But the popular theory is that he's living in a trailer somewhere in the Mojave working on his last book. On account of, after his first book, he always said that he would only write a dozen, and then he would kill himself. He never gave many interviews after that. She handed him these and a couple of other books in a stack. You have to read these and tell me what you think. That evening, when he returned to his car, it would not start. He cursed it, then prayed and tried again. It did no good. All of the mechanics would be closed by now, and it wasn't as if he could afford any sort of major repairs, even if he could get it there. He had an appointment for the following day to see an apartment in the outskirts of the city. It was a subsidized unit in the Barrett Sanger housing complex. Finding a way there would be his first priority. The car would have to wait until later. He fell asleep reading. The bus dropped him off a little over 3 miles from the apartments. He'd never been to this part of the city. Not that there was much to see. A few bleached streets running off into the distance. Flat, to a grim and murky horizon. The row of rundown houses behind him seemed to be a receding frontier for civilization itself, against the wastes laid out before him in a faded grid. Like stepping out from the tree line of some dense timber forest onto a vast and open scrub plain. There was an old man on the porch of one of those last houses in a rocking chair. His wrinkled head held back, eyes closed in little slits. His sparse figure made the guitar he held on his lap appear enormous, like a novelty instrument or something made for a statue. The nylon cords he strummed hung like a spider's web on the breeze, and then died somewhere out on the wastelands. There was a sign on his gate. No religious or political types. The sun was still low, and a slight but persistent fog, or maybe it was smog, overhung everything. Most of the streets were reduced to sparse archipelagos of weary concrete amidst an encroaching dominion of flat, sickly-looking brown grass. Several times he passed a ruined foundation or the charred corpse of a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, but most of the lots were empty. Fire hydrants and what few stretches of yellow-painted road lines were still visible appeared as kitschy and haunted museum relics of some long apocalypsed civilization, all watched over by the dulcet grin of Lars Halterman, hovering 100 feet in the air on billboards every few blocks. For you, the people. For mayor. There was not a speck of gray in his hair, none of the familiar lines on his face. Michael hardly recognized him. Because the world through which he passed seemed simultaneously to be ever-changing and ever staying the same, time melted. The morning was long, though he never felt particularly tired. And then at some point he realized that the sun was nearly overhead. His shadow drew nearer to him. The appointment was at 3. He was now glad to have all the peanut butter sandwiches on hand. Not long after a short lunch break, the housing complex appeared on the horizon like a ghost, looming over the landscape. 3 concrete towers, like rockets or missile silos on the plains. Michael passed a still-standing street sign. He was on Baltimore. The wind was blowing. Barrett Sanger grew more imposing with each block that he traveled. Soon he was having to crane his neck just to see the tops of the megaliths, and then for half a mile he walked in their shadow, which stretched farther over the grid behind him with each passing minute. There were a half-dozen tiny little birds circling the summits. A few dozen cars in various states of disrepair littered the blasted parking lot. All dark, many rusted, little to separate them visually from their environment. As he approached, the detail in the architecture became evident. Hundreds of rounded balconies gave the structures the appearance of giant beehives emerging from the earth. Like the entirety of the ground was honeycombed and crawling beneath his feet, obscured only by a thin spreading of topsoil. Dusty cobblestone driveway, a ring of columns around the perimeter of the base of each building from the ground up to the second story. Stepping between them, he felt the weight of all that concrete and sandstone suspended in the air above his head. Signs on the wall led him to the leasing office, an industrial metal door in the foundation of Building A, which was a smaller concentric bunker for the wider beehive to rest atop. It was ringed by a frosted window. The light inside was meek. The door was locked, so he rang the buzzer and looked into a nearby security camera. Nearly a minute passed before he was buzzed through. The interior was sparse, like an old mechanic's shop. Urine-tinged light, a few bony waiting room chairs, empty water cooler and 40-year-old coffee maker near the only other door, this one set in a yet more interior, concentric cylinder of concrete near a service window. Wire-reinforced glass, shade drawn. He sat down and waited. He waited for a long time. The clock on the wall was broken, and the limp hanging hands did not move from 6:30. Time was nothing. And then a PA system he had not noticed crackled to life. Good afternoon, sir or madam. This message is to notify you that your housing application has been received and approved. Congratulations. Your name will be added to the wait list in the order in which your application was received. You are currently number 3074 in line. Expected move-in date 6 years, 11 months. Do you have any questions at this time? Michael said nothing. This concludes the interview. Have a pleasant day. 6 years and 11 months. His head was swimming. The birds were still circling overhead when he emerged back into the sunlight. He squinted. The world was too bright. He was nearly across the parking lot when a car pulled up beside him and slowed to his pace. Not an earth-tone junker like all the others that littered the lot, black with tinted black windows. Luxury model. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a middle-aged man in dark sunglasses. "Excuse me. Can I speak with you a moment?" Michael didn't see why not. The man told him he had an offer for him, one that could solve all of his problems. Money and a place to live. Michael asked him what type of offer. A job. He went with him. Neither spoke, and the longer they drove, the more Michael began to worry that he had acted in haste, in desperation, from a simple desire to act, period, to intervene somehow in the decision of his own fate, for better or worse. Each mile on the odometer took him farther from, well, from what, exactly? A broken-down car he couldn't afford to fix? For the first time in his life, then, he felt what it was to be unfixed completely, floating utterly unmoored in the universe. No place to return to and no place to go. Any patch of earth the same as any other, more or less. None of it belonged to him, and he didn't have any permission to occupy any of it. Home being only whatever place his body occupied from moment to moment. And at this late date, even at his relatively young age, with a lot of life left to be lived, or endured, Michael knew he could not expect to stand anywhere long, be it a parking lot or a house in which his parents had conceived and raised him, before someone came along looking to collect their piece of the rent. Even if the man was delivering him to some nefarious design, Michael thought, it would, at least, represent something different. A change in the seemingly fixed trajectory his life had taken on lately. Change, at this point, was good or bad. If one thing could change, then everything could change. But until one thing changed, nothing ever would. But they arrived, and it was, after all, just a diner, just like the man had said. Not that bad things couldn't happen at diners. It was between lunch and dinner, and the place was mostly empty. The man ordered himself a coffee. "Do you like coffee?" Michael shrugged, nodded. "2 coffees," he told the waitress. "So they put you on the list. 5 years. The man nodded knowingly. He shifted in the booth, straining to look at the rest of the diner. "You got a piece on you? Pull it out and try and rob this place, and they'll probably let you out just in time. If you need somewhere to go in the meantime, that is." He smirked and tore open a sugar packet as the waitress approached with the coffee pot. "Thank you." He watched her pour with a bored grin and then added 6 more sugars. As he stirred, he looked out the window. "What if I told you that place isn't even going to be there in 5 years?" "It won't?" "Not if I have anything to say about it. Not if the city knows what's best. But they so rarely do." "I'm sure you are wondering what this all has to do with you, though, right? Here's the deal. You don't want to live in that place anyway, do you? Not really, right? Nobody does. It's better than living in your car. But that's about all you can say, and that's not saying much, is it? That's where I come in. Let's just say that I've got a little bit of money saved up, and a few friends with a little bit of money, too. And we'd like to buy that property, bulldoze those dumps, and build luxury condos instead." "Oh. Once construction costs are paid off, we're looking at $500 million plus a year in profit. Pure profit. You know how much Barrett Sanger makes a year after upkeep costs? It's barely profitable. It's despicable that such a prime piece of land is being allowed to just sit there stagnating, practically losing money. actually losing money in a real sense for the city, for everyone, monopolizing that property. When you think about what it could be, I thought it was government housing. Can the government even make a profit? The man shrugged. What's the point of life if you can't make a profit? How are you so sure they'll sell it to you? My close personal friend is close personal friends with the mayor. He just wants what's best for the city. We all do. Where do I come in then? You are the prime mover, my friend. You see, the government will never just admit when they've done something wrong or something is failing. There's too much bureaucracy, too many people's jobs on the line, right? Paper pushers. But if something were to happen to the building, say something which might render it hypothetically uninhabitable for human life, even for poor people, no offense, well, then they'd have no choice but to tear it all down, right? If it were condemned. Hell, in that scenario, the responsible thing to do would be to sell the property, right? Recover whatever you could for it. Do right by the taxpayers and all that for once. Uninhabitable for human life? Michael stared at the man, his eyes narrowed. It sounds way worse than it is, said the rich man. You'd be surprised how little it takes these days, how squeamish some of the inspectors can be. The way some of these modern building and health codes are written doesn't always take much. The waitress returned and the man told Michael to order whatever he wanted. He did. You won't have to hurt anyone, he said. I promise. It's a victimless crime. Hell, it barely even qualifies as a crime. I don't like the sound of any of this, to be honest, said Michael. You haven't heard my offer. One of the condos will have your name on it. And to hold you until then, $300,000. Cash. Michael nearly choked on his coffee. The man slid a slip of paper across the table. That's my number. Call me with your answer. Please don't make me wait long. The partners and myself are eager to move forward on this sooner than later. He put a 50 on the table and took 100 from his wallet and gave it to Michael for the cab. Then he left. Michael ate in silence. He'd ordered so much he thought he might puke. When the cab arrived, he gave the driver the address of his sister's apartment. It was one of the only he knew off the top of his head. He called ahead, and though she didn't sound very excited on the phone, when Michael arrived, she had the guest bedroom all made up for him. Fresh towels and linens laid out on the bed, a pitcher of lemon water on the desk. The only thing that was missing was a mint on the pillow. It was almost, somehow, too welcoming. Michael felt like he'd be expected to check out by 11 the next morning. Like in some perverse way, an air mattress and throw pillow would have been more hospitable. He knew within 30 seconds of walking in the door that there was no long-term solution waiting for him there, though his sister smiled and was perfectly pleasant and said all of the proper accommodating things one says in such a situation. And besides, it was already nearly dark, and once he was in a bed, there was no way Michael would be venturing back out into the hostile city to find a place to sleep in his car, no matter how guilt-ridden his mind. He could suffer his anguish warm, without having to worry that the next person he saw might tap on the window and tell him to move along. When he woke in the mid-morning, the apartment was empty, his sister already at work. He packed his few belongings and left her a note, atop the one she'd left him, and then made his way back to the library. She was there at the front desk. She smiled at him. His heart skipped. "How's Ludlow treating you?" she asked. "Depends how much I like sleep, I guess." "That good, huh? Back for more, then?" "What else have you got for me?" Back in the Ludlow corner, she pulled him a few books, but before long they were simply talking. They talked for so long that one of the other librarians came looking for her missing comrade, whose name was Katie Parker. "Do you still have that strange book you found?" He did. She flipped through it. "Do you have any idea when he wrote this?" He did not. She looked at the small book with plain binding in her hands. A dull magnetism thrummed between its covers. "Can I take it home for the night?" She could. When the library closed that evening, she offered him a ride, but he had nowhere to go, and so politely declined, and headed off on foot, as if he very much had somewhere to go, until she was out of sight. And then he stopped and looked around. One direction seemed as good or bad as any other, and so he began to wander. As long as he walked, he could think, but he didn't have to either. He could just walk. And as long as he was walking, he didn't have to think. He could put it off till later and just walk. Just keep moving forward. As long as he kept moving, nobody could yell at him and tell him to keep it moving. He could pass through just about anywhere. He could stay almost nowhere. He could make his next move or decide on what it would be whenever he arrived wherever he was going. Soon the streets he walked emptied of people. He passed the lit face of a clock tower glowing in the sky like a false moon between two neo-Gothic skyscrapers. Nearly midnight. He stopped and looked around and noticed a sign for something called the Underground. He went in the direction it pointed, down one side street and then another. Just as he was about to give up and declare himself lost, another sign pointed the way anew. He crossed back, through downtown and then midtown, with all of the dark coffee shops and silent office buildings and patio tables stacked with upside-down chairs, and the rats darting now and again across the dead streets. Wide, impassive eyes watched his progress from the cover of sleeping bags tucked into shadowy awnings. In a few hours, someone would flip the "Sorry, we're closed" signs over, and the blankets and sleepers alike will have vanished, as if banished by the light itself to somewhere else, somewhere hidden. They are not allowed where there is life, where there is business to conduct. He found what he was seeking at last in Uptown. His feet ached, his legs had rarely been so tired in all his life. In fact, though all of the signage indicated that he had arrived, he didn't actually know where he was or what he was looking for. There were more homeless here, he noticed, pushing shopping carts and milling about. He wondered when he would start to think of himself as homeless. Now and then someone would scream at themselves, or at least someone Michael could not see. It always made him jump. Nobody else seemed to notice. The signs seemed to indicate that he ought to move farther in the direction of all these loiterers, so he did. Most seemed not to even notice his presence, or much of anything for that matter, but those who did acknowledge him stared plainly, and for a long time, with no attempt made whatsoever to disguise it, like a toddler whose parent has yet neglected to inform them that it is considered rude. Society has done nothing for them, he thought. Maybe they are just returning the favor in kind, then, flaunting its little niceties and expectations, going out of their way to make people uncomfortable, or at least not going out of their way not to. At what point does your dignity lose out against the desire to make the people who've done this, or at least done nothing to stop it, face up to the world they really live in, to make them confront reality, even for a minute? At what point does being sneered at but acknowledged become preferable to invisibility? Maybe there's no such thought to it. Maybe those are just the ones who've lost their minds to the streets entirely. It was like they could smell it on him that he'd slept in a bed with a roof over his head less than a week ago, and he felt compelled to tell everyone he passed that he was living out of his car. He wanted to find a bank statement and show them the $35 in his checking account. But then, not a single person had asked him for change. Maybe they already knew. When he looked up, he was standing in front of an imposing freestanding brick archway. The Underground, spelled out in big block letters. He was in the middle of a wide courtyard stretching several blocks. The stairs beneath the arch led down into a smaller courtyard, which was something like a deep pit in the center of the space. It was very dark. He'd come this far. About halfway down the steps, the dread boring into his stomach became unignorable, and he paused. Every muscle was tensed, begging him to turn around, sprint back up. Who cared who he offended? Who cared if he looked ridiculous? He needed to run, and now. Run back to... well, where exactly? And what precisely was he afraid of? Being robbed? He took a breath, and then took the rest of the stairs. At the bottom, he saw what had been hidden from him at the top by shadows and the angles of the brickwork, which was at the far wall, beneath an overhang, was lined with glass doors. All but a handful were boarded over. The brown water-stained, no trespassing signs looked at least 5 years old. He tried one of the unbarricaded doors. It was locked. He pressed his face to the glass and realized that what he had simply taken for the darkness inside was actually a black covering placed directly on the door, and the bottom corner was peeling a few doors over. There was dim light coming from inside. He tried the push bar without thinking. If he'd stopped to consider it at all, what that light might indicate or imply, he'd have already been halfway back to the library to wait for morning. He assumed it would be locked like the others. He met little resistance. Before he could think, the door was opening beneath his hand. He found himself in an atrium, ochre tile floor, and a clouded skylight ceiling, like the malls of his childhood. The light was coming from a trash can fire in the basin of a dry fountain. Several were gathered round the barrel, blinking, several more lounging or hunched along the low retaining wall. All appeared to be looking in his direction. It was too late to even think of closing the door. He felt as though he had just woken from a dream to find himself floating on a raft in the middle of the ocean. As his eyes adjusted, more figures appeared along the outer reaches of the fire's light, their images flickering like phantoms. He had intruded on something, this much was clear, but he also had the sense that he could pass through if he acted like he'd meant to be there, and did indeed move along. He set his course for the opposite end of the room, praying there was something to it besides shadow and wall. There was. Down a few steps he emerged into a wide hall, wide enough to move a small airplane. Dark glass and metal cages lined either wall as far as he could make out. He was indeed in a shopping mall, or what had once been one, though all of the stores were empty and unmarked. Here, too, as his eyes adjusted, he began to notice shapes, suggestions of people, materializing in his periphery, out of the shadows. People sleeping, or at least lying, on the benches. Rubber palms in big, dusty concrete pots. Sleeping bags rolled out on tile floors behind the rolled-down security cages. He walked past a lot where a jewelry store had been, or would have been, and in the display cases a museum menagerie, or maybe a sales display, a decapitated doll's head, no body in sight, an empty detergent jug, a pile of broken golf tees. He looked into another store and saw clothes on the shelves, someone's personal wardrobe. He walked through a section which lasted for nearly a minute, and was covered entirely, walls, floor, and ceiling, in an elaborate spray-painted design, which depicted a great city on the back of a turtle, shot through with tentacled veins, tentacles that seemed almost to grasp out at you as you walked by, threatened to wrap squelching and oil gleaming around your ankle, tentacles which seemed to have the entire great city in their squirming grasp, ready to throttle all of it in one muscular twitch. The city had been painted in a very stylized manner, cartoonish even, but the tentacles looked very real, very wet. As he walked farther, he noticed the eyes. Human, or at least human scale, peppered throughout the dark places of the mural, which seemed almost to glow in the gloom and to follow his every step. Twice Michael stopped and grasped at his own heart, sure for a moment that there was some entity glowering at him from some murky fringe at the corner of his vision. The food court was dark, but punched through with a strong odor of food and cooking, such that Michael was overcome with the intense feeling that he was not alone, despite what his eyes told him. That electric tension in the air of some lively activity having ceased abruptly only moments before, like being in a too quiet wood where all prey animals have rushed into hiding and are probably watching. He felt a primal thrumming in his spine at his sense of smell being thrust so prominently into the primary current of his moment-to-moment experience and survival. For 99% of his life, it had been purely a complementary sense, a bonus even. And to suddenly sniff out the presence of another in his immediate vicinity, who has not otherwise announced themselves, gave him a distinct feeling of being hunted, the rippling shock to the nervous system that results from the sudden realization that one has dropped a rung on nature's proverbial ladder from human to animal, that the rules, in a manner of speaking, no longer apply. He had read once that the Muslim armies had been able to smell the approaching crusaders from miles away. He shivered and passed quickly. He passed the entrance to a movie theater and an empty playground. He paused outside of a long, very dark hallway which allegedly led to the bathrooms. He had never felt such pure dread in all his life. A howling animal fear, prey instinct. He felt that if he went looking down that hallway, he would find only his death, or possibly something far worse. A booming voice from somewhere behind him, from everywhere. A man's voice, like tar. A PA system.
Christians so obsessed with death, they'll pull you moldering out
corners of your islands. Not a cent is ever forgiven. The ledger never forgets. It took them over 1,000 years to figure out double entry bookkeeping, and now they can think of nothing else. Birth to death. What's a little usury among brothers on a shining hill? What's 31%? Loan charts and payday loan outfits, tabling at college orientation. Everything you're taught is a lie. Everything you know, it's ideology. You're convinced that it's not. That that's something for the unrefined people of the past. But you're like a fish in water with that shit, baby. All it takes is an ability to think for yourself for even a few seconds a day about even the most basic things. They say that this system of ours works because it encourages people to move society forward by rewarding them materially. So who do you think makes all of the money around here? Is it the folks who bring you your food, drive your buses, clean your offices? No? You're telling me it's the folks who send emails and move numbers around on computers all day, scamming each other, scamming you and me, devising ways to sell us less and worse than yesterday for more today, running the numbers and deciding it's worth it to give 5,000 people cancer rather than make a recall because the fines and lawsuits are going to be less than the profit they lose out on. Gotcha. Almost tyrants had the decency and pop and flair to attribute their reign to God. It was self-evident and self-justifying. All questions were answered in the asking. The bourgeois justify their terror with meritocracy in the same unimpeachable position. Let their delusions be for them and their therapists. You need not cloud your mind with such fairy tales. Wake up. Feel the warm sun on your face. You are a child of God in His own image. You belong to this earth, to the grass, the water, the sun, and the stars. You are the very essence of life itself, the universe experiencing itself as if for the first time. This world belongs to you, and you to it. Now, please, kindly fork over another $100 if you would like to continue existing for another 24 hours. The only thing more American than a boxcar tramp is a swindler, a con man, a hustler. A nation under God, founded on a bedrock of liberty, freedom, and compound interest. Property rights, as in, you don't really qualify as a human if you don't have property. If you're not human, you don't really qualify for human rights, do you? And if you don't have human rights, well then, partner, I hate to be the one to bring it to you, but guess what? You are the property. But you already knew that. Your betters. The people who diligently train their 5 senses to ignore you entirely, not to look at you, not to speak with you, to pretend as best as they can possibly manage that you simply aren't even there. They call themselves consumers. Ha! Pigs at the trough. They exist to be consumed. They are fuel. This talk of cogs in the machine, such self-flattery. cheaper, let it be poison, all the better. While they drain us dry, and as soon as they can't get $1 out of you anymore, they'll toss your husk into the waste bin and charge you $8,000 for the privilege. It's nothing but husks and blood-sucking demons on up from here, folks. Whatever level of hell we're in, you've got to fight your way out. The PA system remained keyed for nearly another minute, in which Michael did not move, barely breathed any more than was absolutely necessary. But the man spoke no more, was only heard breathing now and then somewhere in all that crackling static, grunting as if he were shifting his weight, some great bulk reposing. Michael could only assume hidden somewhere within the walls of that sprawling capitalist catacomb. He walked on, and after 5 minutes' time, the hall dead-ended in a proportionally small door. The sign above was ornately designed. The streets of yesteryear. Michael tried the door. Again, not knowing why, not even considering that he wouldn't do so until he'd already done it, because of course if he'd considered it, he might not have, and found it unlocked. He was standing on cobblestone. The dimensions of the hall shrank through the doorway, and the streets of yesteryear felt severely cramped comparatively. Oil lamps lined the street, hemmed in on both sides by old-timey building facades. A barber, a druggist, faint stars, and a little moon were painted on the ceiling. He passed a tavern and saw men inside, drinking and chattering merrily. A proud trolley sat in the middle of the street, gathering dust. A woman in her underwear and an unbuttoned men's shirt staggered out of an alley and collapsed into his arms. Before he knew what was happening, she looked up into his eyes. Hers were watery, glistening, and forlorn. His hands were wet. She grew heavier in his arms, and a trail of blood trickled from her lips. Her eyes glazed over, no longer looking at his, seeing nothing more from without, gazing only inwards now, off on some unknowable spiral, down into her conscience. Her shirt was soaked, the bare skin of her belly slick. Michael thought he saw a shadow move somewhere to his left. And he was gone, moving with an animal speed and agility, a deftness of limb and mind he did not know he still possessed, his sneakers clapping like pistol shots on the cobblestones. In the morning, he called the man from outside Barrett Sanger and told him that he had some concerns. What about all the people living there now? It's a miserable place to live, he said. They'd be better off just about anywhere else. You've seen it for yourself. It's barbaric. Michael was quiet for a while, but he did not hang up. An hour later, the man wired $10,000 into his checking account. He called the bank about the mortgage and then called a tow truck. He paid the mechanic's bill and booked the cheapest motel he could find for the night. Next day, he returned to his house. It was musty, the air stale. And something was very wrong. He knew this as soon as he closed the door behind him. The atmosphere was disturbed. Someone else was in the house with him. He did not know how he knew this. Someone from the bank? No. Whoever it was hiding from him. He realized he was holding his breath. Should he move silently or go about some sort of quasi-routine and try to make it seem as if he were none the wiser? He flipped the light switch. Evidently, the electricity had been shut off. Jungle vines crawling over the windows, soft blue light of morning. He coughed. The dust mote hung suspended in mid-air, waiting for some other shoe to drop. None did. He moved upstairs. He knew where to step. Outside, near the baseboard, to avoid squeaks. Skip the 5th step. Upstairs, all of the bedroom doors were closed. In the interior hall, it may as well have been night. He opened his bedroom door. The bed was slept in. Empties on the floor, inside-out chip bag on the desk. Cigarette butts collected in a mug on his bedside table. Still warm. He took a baseball bat from his closet, glad now that he'd never gotten around to cleaning it out. He checked every bedroom, heart pounding, and then he went downstairs and checked the first floor, and in the whole of the house and the garage he found no one. But then there was the basement, unfinished, cold, and dank. From the time he was young, he had always dreaded those frenzied flights up the open-backed stairs in the dark, always saw eyes watching him from beneath, felt clammy and icy fingers grasping at his narrow ankles. He opened the door. It whined on its hinges. A wave of damp and pungent air washed over his face, as if he were standing at the mouth of a cave. He descended. Faint scent of rot, decay, an earthy smell. The air grew cooler. There were boxes against the walls nearly to the ceiling. Christmas, Halloween decorations, baby clothes. There was something about seeing his dad's handwriting in this context that made his heart stutter. And then there was the other box, more of a shipping crate, sitting on the concrete floor at the center of the room. Michael took a hammer from his dad's old toolbox and pried it open. The inside was filled with hay, and there was an envelope on top. The note inside was brief. Get to work. As he placed it down, he felt something moist slide across his pinky finger. Recoiled. On closer inspection with a flashlight, he found the hay brimming with little worms. Dozens of them. Little stubby ones. Nothing like the long earthworms he was familiar with, but nubby, almost grubby, squirming, tapered to 2 distended points with a glistening belt in between the width of his pinky finger. He felt bile move within him. He replaced the lid and tapped it shut with the hammer. He took the toolbox upstairs. He did not know why exactly, he just did it. It made him feel safer somehow. He drank a glass of water and wondered if whatever vagrant had been sleeping in his bed would return. The rest of the day just sort of disappeared after that. He looked up and realized that the sun had begun to set. He made himself noodles and lit some candles and settled in with some of the Ludlow books Katie had given him. And by the time he even thought to call the electric company, it was too late for them to send anyone out. They'd be there in the morning. He fell asleep on the couch sometime before midnight. When he woke, it was still dark, and there were muffled voices coming from the porch. Or he thought he'd heard someone talking, mumbling. When he tried to focus on the voices, they disappeared, melted back into the background radiation of the evening. He began to question whether it had been voices at all. Sure as he'd been mere moments ago. And then a man's shadow passed in front of the window. Michael's heart ran away from him then. His mind stumbled over itself, trying to compile a list of who it could be, reasons someone could be on your porch at 3 a.m. It could only have been burglars, he reasoned. And then something happened which he did not anticipate. They knocked. Michael froze, said nothing. For a long time it was silent. I'm not the milkman, Michael. I'm not going to disappear if you close your eyes. Michael's heart raced, a lump in his throat like a fist. Cold, cold fear flooded his veins. You're my only stop for the evening, and I brought coffee and a newspaper. Say, did you ever get around to reconnecting your phone line in there? Michael cracked the door, but did not unlatch the security chain. The man's teeth were bright yellow, his smile like a shark's, greasy skin shining in the moonlight. Hello. The low timbre of his voice displaced something in the pit of Michael's stomach. He felt as though his muscles were melting off his bones. It's a bit rude to leave me standing on your porch like this. We have business to discuss. People with legitimate business don't go knocking on doors in the middle of the night. The man sighed. All right, suit yourself. Would be a shame if I had to involve your sister in this, though. Does she know what an addict you are? Fuck off, said Michael. He closed the door. But the man did not move, did not fuck off. A moment later, Michael opened the door, and the man stepped gregariously into the house. The sight of the gun on his hip as he passed nearly caused Michael to faint. The hard, matte black gravity of the thing sucked all of the oxygen from the room. He could see nothing else, or rather, it all seemed to exist in some lesser plane of reality. Just an object, plastic and metal, like any other, endowed with a suffocating hyper-reality. The man helped himself to a glass of water from the sink. Do you know why I'm here? He said. Michael said nothing. My boss sent me. You know how bosses can be. He gulped down the last of the water and put the glass in the sink. You got any guesses as to who my boss might be, Mike? Again, Michael was silent. Does Roman Fontana ring a bell? One of Michael's most in-deep creditors from the sports betting department. Michael didn't even like baseball. They just play so many goddamn games. I'm sorry. Not a good way to start. I don't have the money. I need time to find a job. But you got money for the bank, huh? Michael at first thought it a rhetorical question, but the longer the man stared at him, the less sure he became. He stuttered. Is J.P. Morgan sending goons with guns to pay you visits? I'm sorry. I don't... I can't get it back. I was living in my car. You seem pretty new at this, so let me offer you a pointer. Get your fucking priorities straight. I don't know what you want me to tell you. I don't have it. The man pulled the gun from its holster. I don't want to hear you say the word no again, understand? I want plans, actionable plans. You'd kill me over 12 grand? People get killed every day. I can give you 500. But how am I supposed to eat? The man laughed to himself. You don't know the first thing about me. Not one thing. Or about the people I work for, apparently. It's not the dollar amount. It's the principle of the thing. And the interest. Now he laughed in Michael's face. Whatever little calculation that you just did in your head there, whatever part of your ass you pulled that number from, you might want to rethink it. And this time, make sure to factor in the fact that your brain is about to be all over that beautiful backsplash in about 30 seconds if I don't have that money or an actionable plan from you to get it. You're going to be real thankful to have that extra $250 then, huh? Squirreling it away for snacks? For who? The squirrels when they get done eating your corpse? Years of building a loyal customer relationship, and it comes to this? The man shook his head. You don't get it. You think you're someone at 12 G's? You're barely a tax write-off. No. At this he moved closer like a swaying cobra. The thing for my boss is the blatant disrespect, you see? He put his arm around Michael and tugged him deeper into the kitchen with disconcerting ease. At 12 G's, he'd just as soon I kill you as collect, just for the satisfaction of it, to be frank, you see? He's real big on life lessons, this guy. You know the type. I'm sure you've worked for him. Like, what? Actions have consequences, right? He's always saying that. Things of that nature. Money isn't everything. Things like that. Michael felt something cold against his temple. Hot piss flowed down his leg. Jesus Christ, please don't. Come on, Mikey. I thought you were different. You think everyone doesn't say that? Don't you want to live? It's nut-cutting time, buddy, now or never. Dig deep. Now is no time for cliches. What chance are you giving yourself saying the same exact goddamn thing as every other dead man? He leaned in closer, moist breath landing on the skin behind Michael's ears. Whispered, Don't you at least want me to remember you, if nothing else? I do this for a living. To me, you're the last thing standing between me and the leftover risotto I've got waiting for me in the fridge at home. To you, I'm the last thing you'll ever see, the last voice you'll ever hear. I'm the end of your world, the Grim Reaper incarnate, brother, the boogeyman that lived under your childhood bed. It all led here. He started to yell. Let's go, pal! Think! It might be your last chance. Better get as much of it in as you can while you've still got used to that thing. Something good, something original. No pressure, though. He slammed Michael down into the counter, knocking the wind from him and loosening a tooth. He cried out and crumpled to the tile floor, grasping at his face, mouth contorting in silent agony, barely able to breathe, his heels sliding uselessly back and forth along the linoleum. The man paced to the other side of the kitchen, ran his hands through his hair. You think they'll spend any time at all investigating a self-inflicted gunshot wound on an unmarried, unemployed, broke, friendless man drowning in debt? Do you think anyone will even care, even a little bit? The man rifled noisily through Michael's dad's toolbox and came out with a pair of pliers. My mother always wanted me to go to dental school. When he'd finished his work, he released him and pulled a handful of zip ties from the small bag he'd brought. He slid one from the plastic. "Let's hear the plan, champ." Michael shook his head in meek and terrified resignation. "Sorry I don't have any gauze handy." Michael felt dumbly, gingerly at his cheek. "Even after I gave you all that time to think. Still, nothing? Are you sure you even really like being alive?" He crossed the kitchen toward Michael, cracked his neck and knuckles. "Have you ever seen how they neuter dogs in Africa?" He brushed the tip of the zip tie over Michael's snot-glistening lips. He coughed, and a little blood spurted out. "Please stop," he said. "Please, please, I'll try. I've got a plan." He was at the library when it opened in the morning. He needed to see Katie. Not to tell her about what had happened, he just wanted to be around her. He was up all night, racked by a panic attack that lingered past the dawn, and felt very certain that if he could not see her, he would never breathe normally again. He did not have health insurance, so he held a bag of peas on his cheek and took a handful of over-the-counter painkillers, which did little except spur anxiety about his liver, and drank whiskey, which did help a little with everything. She was waiting for him when he arrived, with too much to tell, and too urgently to notice his swollen face. He'd rinsed with mouthwash before leaving, but still tried to avoid breathing too close to her. If she smelled the whiskey, she made no mention. She pulled him down an aisle, biographies, LI to SA, out of view and out of earshot of her colleagues at the circulation desk. The padded carpet muffled their footsteps. She showed him a book. The Subterranean Letters by Luther Ludlow. It's an advance copy. Someone from the publisher dropped it off last night. He flipped through the pages. Not Fisher Pax? She shrugged. I guess he's back. He read the back cover, the author bio. Born March 5th, 1956, at a hospital in Wichita, Kansas. The photo showed a young man in his late 20s or early 30s, bearing only the first faint whiff of distinction. Handsome in a classic, mid-century sort of way. Smiling, barely. Have you read it yet? She nodded. I don't know what to make of it. It's a novel. In a lot of ways, it's classic Ludlow. But I don't know. It kind of made me feel sick. Like it was nasty? No, I mean, spiritually, yes. But that's not it. No. I don't know. I'm sorry. Clearly, I didn't get enough sleep. She sighed and rubbed her eyes. I couldn't tell you what it was in the text itself that made me feel so nauseous, if it was even anything in the text. It's like there was just a foul energy radiating from the book whenever I picked it up or thought about it for too long. It's a novel, but it feels so immediate, so urgent. In flipping through the book, Michael gleaned that it was some sort of epistolary story. Like it's vibrating at some frequency that my ears aren't able to hear. Like it's sending out some mass signal that's not meant for me. By the time he was 50 pages in, Michael was sure of it. The voice he'd heard on the intercom in the underground was none other than the author himself. The coincidences, the parallel thinking, there was no mistaking it. He returned to the library the next time it was open and found Katie. He asked if she had ever heard of the underground and mentioned that he was thinking of taking a trip to explore it. "Oh," she said, "I wouldn't do that if I were you. Not right now, anyway." He asked her why not. "It's not safe. Someone's been stalking around there, killing people. It's been going on for months now. The police don't even give a shit. The news will never report anything about it. It's mostly vagrants and the homeless that hang around there these days. But it's all over the internet. They warn anyone who goes down there not to travel alone. They call him Jack 2. Jack as in the Ripper? A bunch of people noticed that his first few victims were very obvious copycat attempts, or as they called it on this podcast I was listening to, an homage. Sounds like he's got a real cheeky sense of humor. The killer or the podcast? Both, I guess. Did you know Ted Gilmore almost built a second Gilly World there in the 60s? Really? Here? She nodded. It started when they thought the World's Fair might be coming here. They had plans drawn up for an entire district of the city, miniature models and everything. There would be rides, but there would also be shopping, too, and restaurants. He even had started building a Museum of America to celebrate the upcoming bicentennial. It was one of his little passion projects, but Gilmore was an adamant teetotaler and wouldn't allow a drop of alcohol on any property of his. Considering the Lindholm Brewery was the biggest employer in town at the time, that was never going to fly. So after months of haggling and posturing and strong-arming, they decided it was never going to work and abandoned the whole thing. The following day, he returned to the underground. He opted, in the end, not to bring Katie, and for the same reason that he opted to bring his dad's old gun. A little snub-nose, the type women kept in their purse. That was his dad, practical to the end. He had to stop on the way to buy bullets. He stuffed the thing in his sweatshirt pocket. It's kind of incredible, he thought, all things considered, that blue jeans don't have a gun pocket. The skylights in the anteroom were yellowed and caked in years of dirt and soot and grime, and the place was scarcely any brighter in the daytime. The can fire had gone out, and there was a man sleeping on a blanket on a bench near the fountain. Michael stirred him awake. "Is Luther Ludlow here?" The man shooed him away and rolled over onto his side. He continued on. He tried his query on several others that he passed, but none would stop to talk to him. He took several wrong turns, not all on purpose. One dead-ended in an indoor courtyard, 5 stories high, the ceiling painted to look like a summer sky. 5 rows of dark and square windows, flanked by white show shutters too narrow to cover the width of the windows. There was astroturf on the floor, and a mural of cartoon trees on the walls. He was about to leave when he noticed a door hidden in the mural, a heavy security door with a push bar and a security glass sliver window. A placard on the wall read, "Child Enrichment Center," twice, once sans serif and once in Braille. The inside was dark, but the broad strokes of a classroom were apparent in the shadows. The door was locked. There were people in the walls, he noticed, tucked into the mid-ground forest of the mural. They were standing in a circle in the woods around a mossy boulder, around the viewer, with their arms linked in a chain. There was an almost orgasmic quality to the ecstasy painted on their faces that Michael found off-putting. He left. Soon he found himself once more at the entrance to the streets of yesteryear. Inside he found no sign of the woman from the other night. He searched in vain for a stain on the cobblestones. When he finally stood up straight, his back hurt, and he realized that there were people inside the storefronts, squatting in the shadows, watching him. He pushed through the acid lump in his throat to ask if any of them had known the woman who died here. None spoke. He ventured deeper. The street split at a gas lamp corner, and then split again. He passed an empty livery, a candy shop, a dentist. In the low light, he nearly walked straight into a large section of drywall that was painted to look as if the street continued on indefinitely. Eventually, all of the side streets and alleys began to reconverge. The web completed and dead-ended at an intersection which saw a lawyer's corner office adjacent to an inn and saloon. The windows of the office were aglow with lantern light. He pushed open the door and realized that all of the buildings were built at 3/4 scale. The top of his head nearly grazed the doorframe. There was someone in the room. A man at the far end of the condensed space sat behind a big desk, puffing on a cigar. When he stood, Michael saw that he was wearing no pants, only an open robe and the most threadbare boxers he'd ever seen. He rummaged through one of the desk drawers and emerged with a bowie knife, so large that Michael's brain stuttered a moment, trying to knit together a consistent reality for him despite the contradictory sensory input of that big a knife coming out of that small a drawer. He blinked. "Who the fuck are you, and what the hell do you want?" There were several empty bourbon bottles grouped neatly on the floor around the overflowing trash can. Michael eyed the period-accurate furniture, the period-inaccurate electric typewriter on the desk next to the PA microphone. "I think I'm a fan." He twisted the cigar between his teeth and rubbed one temple, blew a big cloud of smoke. He had gray hair down to his shoulders, and his face was unshaven. His head was astonishingly close to the ceiling. "Who are you?" He still held the knife in one hand. "Did Milton and Bradley send you?" Michael shook his head. "I don't know if they relayed the message to you, but I told the last little errand boy that the next one they sent wouldn't come back with his face so intact." "I just like the books. I was in here the other day. I heard you on the PA system." The author studied him. "So you want an autograph?" "No." "Just to bother me, then, for no material gain whatsoever. Even better. Did you read the new book?" He nodded. "What did you think?" "It kind of scared the shit out of me." "Is it selling?" "I have no idea." "You really aren't from Milton and Bradley after all." "Fisher Pax." The author tilted his head a little, and for the first time he had no ready-made response. "Well, son, now it seems you got me by 2 names, and here you haven't even furnished me with so much as a surname. Puts a man ill at ease." "Michael McDougal. I'm nobody. I'm just a reader." "You with some magazine, then, or what?" "No magazine." "'Cause you have to tell me if you are. And it don't mean I won't talk to you or that I will, but I'm legally entitled to know, you know." "It's not fiction, is it?" Ludlow had been wrong-footed for the second time, and it showed on his face. "Well, don't tell that to the New York Times." "Is it?" Ludlow studied Michael, his jaw firmly set. "Where's the line? My line's different than your line. And where the line was yesterday ain't where it's going to be tomorrow. Hell, some folks in this room might even tell you fiction's more real than reality." He stubbed the cigar out on the desk. The small room was filled with long fingers of lingering smoke. "I assume you are making all of this into a story as we speak. Of a kind. For yourself?" A black tuxedo cat with green eyes slinked out from under the desk and twisted itself around Michael's leg. "This isn't real life otherwise, is it? Not really, right? Real life happens out there, up on the movie screen, on TV, to other, realer people. Could you imagine if this, he gestured to the room around them, was all there was? The cat stretched, rubbed the top of its head against Michael's ankle. Even me, I live in your head. This, he pawed at his own flesh, can only be disappointment. He lit another cigar. Do you ever suspect that God created the world to escape his own madness? To distract his own trapped monologue with something besides itself for 5 seconds? The cat looked up at Michael and meowed. Karen, said the author. The cat darted to him and snaked between his legs. I am curious, Michael McDougal. What brings a nice, upstanding young lad such as yourself cause to be standing in the deepest, darkest part of the city? And furthermore, what would it take to get you to leave? I don't know, said Michael. I just like the books. And I don't... He swallowed. I don't feel very upstanding. As of late, frankly, I don't know. The only reason I have a house is because my parents died, and I can barely afford that. And then a couple of months ago, the disability checks stopped showing up, so I appeal it. He must take a moment's break as he realizes he is somehow on the verge of crying. I get a letter back 3 weeks later. Did they find the mistake? No. Turns out they've changed their mind, and now I owe the state $3,500. Where the fuck am I supposed to get $3,500? I'm still paying my dead dad's hospital bills. Ludlow stared at Michael. His eyes seemed now to behold him in a softer light. He jutted his bottom jaw to the side and scratched his beard. He nodded, and his countenance was the warmest that Michael had yet beheld it. He stepped around his desk and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. I believe you have found me on a very fortuitous day. Michael followed him outside and through the streets of yesteryear. There were voices in the alleyways, shadow people moving furtively in the same direction they were, and more by the minute, until they found themselves in the midst of a small, eager throng, whispering indecipherable things as they pushed through the streets. The murmuring grew louder and rose to a head as they came upon the full breadth of the crowd, dozens and dozens, all gathered around the silent trolley. Without hesitation, Ludlow made a single spry hop onto the back platform, remarkable for a man of his size and girth, and in one motion grabbed a balustrade and artfully swung himself around to face the gathered congruents, who fell dutifully silent on seeing his palms raised in the air above their heads. My friends! Michael glanced around him. All eyes were trained on the author. Promises have been made. I won't bore you with words. With that, he jumped down and made his way through the crowd to an electric panel on a nearby wall. He threw a switch, and the trolley roared to life, lights flashing, bell ringing. At first, those nearest scurried in fright like small animals, but soon the crowd began to roar its approval. Many rushed to be the first aboard. After a long time, the crowd had settled enough to govern itself, and the tracks were cleared in an orderly manner. On board, passengers stood and sat in laps and hung from the sides. Ludlow crammed his large frame into the operator's box and rang the bell. Another cheer went out. The trolley shifted into gear and began its glide forward. Onlookers waved as it went, and Ludlow stuck his head from the window as they approached a bend. Regular service starts at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. When Michael expected the crowd to disperse, they instead moved as one mass to follow after the maiden voyage. A larger set of gates opened in the wall, and the trolley rode out into the main section of the mall. When Michael caught up, it was stalled on the tracks, surrounded by people, and more still emerging from the storefronts and back hallways to bear witness. The effort was again made to clear the tracks, but this time the obstructions would not budge. They wanted to hear from Ludlow. Eventually he relented and returned to the rear platform to oblige them. It took several minutes for the cheering to die down when he reappeared. "A symbol of my love for you." The cheering started right back up. When finally it quieted again, the author produced a newspaper. "Our little community has made front-page news." He asked someone near him in the car to read the headline aloud. "Underground shopping center has new buyer. Plan to revitalize. Thumbs up from mayor." A grumbling moved through the crowd. "The people's politician, my friends." The wall of boos came even harder than the cheers had. "They're going to put a nail salon where you sleep. For your neighbor, a Louis Vuitton showroom. You'll be kicked out of your home for an axe-throwing bar. And yuppies and rich teenagers will play mini-golf where you take your morning walks. And food from the kitchen where you now cook your meals and the meals which nourish your brothers and sisters will cost you $70 a plate if the maitre d' even lets you in the door. You're animals to them, less than dogs. They get sad when a dog gets sick. Their Bichons and Shih Tzus will piss in your lovingly cultivated gardens and flower beds. But that's fine, because I'm sure I don't have to tell you what they say about a cornered animal." Michael looked around him and saw an intensity burning in the eyes of the onlookers, which turned his blood cold. 30 million buffalo used to roam the plains of this country. Then they showed up. He pointed upward. Herds miles and miles long. Meet the head when you wake up, and by sundown there's no rear in sight. By the end of the 19th century, there were 300. The largest slaughter in history. Once the train made it easy, the beasts never had a chance. Once they could, it was inevitable in their minds that they would. Boys would set up camp and shoot till they were deaf, bring a dozen rifles and shoot till the barrel of each bent from the heat. You couldn't miss. Single men cleared entire regions, left whole prairies under an unbroken carpet of stinking corpses. There's no reasoning with them when they get that look in their eye. When there's a glimpse of a dime to be made. These automatons for profit. If something exists, then it can be had. And if it can be had, then it should be had by him or by no one. This is his motto. When a man tells you who he is, listen. The next morning, Michael emptied a plastic bin of Christmas decorations and filled it with dirt and worms from the crate in his basement. And then he loaded it into the trunk of his car. He'd also found, on closer inspection of the delivery, a package containing a handyman's coveralls, which he now wore. It was a gray day. The honeycomb towers materialized out of the mist. He parked and found a handcart abandoned near the dumpster. He passed a few quiet people on his way to the elevator. Nobody met his gaze. It was empty, and he heard the industrial lurch of the car echo all the way up the shaft, but he was going down to basement level. The padlock on the chain link gate was hanging next to the latch, unlocked. Michael pushed the cart through. Behind him, the elevator doors closed. It was quiet, but he could sense that he was not alone. Skunk scent of marijuana. He heard whispering. In an alcove around the corner, there huddled a group of teenagers, blinking like a family of opossums. Neither party spoke. Michael pushed his cart into the next room and down a long concrete hall. He stopped at a door marked water. It was not locked. He took a palmful of soil, dry and loose, let it sift through his fingers. The worms were as dry as the dirt, and seemed to have as much life in them. But when he dropped them into the tank, the water appeared to animate them as if by magic. Their nub bodies swelled and plumped and grew dark and dully reflective. They wriggled around a bit at the surface before making for the shadows, the depths, before swimming up the pipes. A deep chill gripped Michael as he watched them squirming and rooting past each other. He traced the path of the pipes with dread, imagined them already packed to bursting with the things, advancing like sentient sludge. When he left, the boys were still sitting in the alcove snickering. Again they became silent in his presence. They stared at him until the elevator doors closed. He could not meet their eyes. Outside, the gloom had dissipated and the sun was shining. Pushing his empty cart, Michael saw a woman steadying her daughter's bike as she learned to ride without training wheels. A half-dozen more bikes were littered on the grass of an empty lot near an electrical box where a group of junior high boys were loitering, laughing at something one of them had said. To his right, a father and his son, dressed in full baseball uniform, were climbing into a car. A man about his age carrying groceries. A woman on the way to the gym. He heard birds chirping in the trees above his car, and children shouting as they chased each other around a playground, somewhere on the other side of the building. The coveralls were warm, and he was sweating. The drive home took forever. He rode the whole way in silence. He repeated the deed a week later, and a week after that. When he returned with the last of the worms, he found the tank so full of them already that the water had overflowed the rim and flooded the room. He closed the door and went in search of another place to release them. The next room he entered was a long forsaken office with two plain desks in the middle facing each other and at least a dozen file cabinets lining the perimeter. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. He opened the top drawer of the nearest cabinet and found it still full of papers and manila folders. He opened one. Henry Abner, date of birth, 7/1/53. 5 feet, 9 inches tall, approximately 140 pounds. Blood pressure normal. Cholesterol normal. Move out date, February 1968. A black and white photo of a black child was paper clipped to the file, and much of the text had been redacted. The header in the upper right corner of the page read, Atomic Energy Commission. He scanned the pages of notes that followed, or at least the bits here and there which had been left unredacted. Cadmium zinc. Cadmium zinc. It appeared again and again. Barrett Sanger, compound FP2266, spinal deformations, cancerous tumors present. Environmental and airborne particulate, measured in samples taken from equipment affixed to WMOK radio broadcast antenna atop South Tower. Strontium, cancer, strontium 90, high levels, 50 times the normal level. There was an envelope in the folder. Something inside rattled when Michael shook it. He turned it upside down, and little white pearls poured out into his palm. He squinted in the dismal fluorescent light. They were teeth. Human baby teeth. Michael recoiled. He shook his hand, and the teeth fell to the tile like summer rain. He wiped his hand over and over on the coveralls. He checked the next cabinet and found a continuation of the same neatly alphabetized system. The envelopes in the next cabinet had evidently spilled or torn or rotted or been chewed through by rats, and the drawer was divided into several bins, M through R and so forth, each containing a sizable hill of loose teeth. Michael felt hot and sick. A few teeth skittered down the slopes of each pile, tink-tinking off the aluminum walls of the drawers. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, the elevator jerked and seemed as if it was stuck. On returning to the surface, Michael could have sworn, though he could never be sure, and thought perhaps it was his memory editorializing, or the day's dying light, that all of the residents he saw appeared paler. Some he would have even described as gaunt. In his dreams of the day thereafter, they are barely more than skeletons. On his way back to the city, he passed the old man on his porch playing the guitar. Something told him to stop, and before he knew what he was doing, he had parked his car along the curb and cut the engine. The man tuned his instrument as Michael approached. "Hello." "Hi." "Sorry to bother you." "No bother." He spit a sunflower seed into a small pile beside his chair. "I was just wondering what you could tell me about the two big towers to the east." "Barrett Sanger?" "Yes, that's right." "You think you fixing to live there?" "I was." "Ha. Yeah, you and about 10,000 other folk." "That's the impression I got." "It ain't what it used to be. And I mean that. Some things ain't what they used to be because you got old. But some things really ain't. I've studied the difference. You understand now?" "You knew people there?" The old man chuckled a bit. "I'd just say I was born there and leave it at that. My parents were part of the first class of residents that moved in when they opened the place up. I still remember till I was 11 years old. Sanger Tower was for white folks, Barrett was for us. My mother had a garden on the balcony. I really thought we lived in the sky." This might sound crazy, but do you remember any sort of studies, like government tests they were running on the residents? The old man smirked. "Shit, probably." At some point, a toothpick had appeared in his mouth. "Ask anyone who lived there back in the day, and they'll have stories for you. White unmarked trucks driving around at night, spraying clouds of God knows what everywhere. Guys in protective suits, checking all the little sensors they put everywhere, while we were walking around in our regular everyday clothes. Make that make sense." "They didn't say what they were doing?" He shrugged. "Some bullshit. They just need a lie to tell you. You know what I'm saying? A lie. It doesn't really matter what it is." "What do you think they were doing?" "God damn, you a newspaper man or something? What is this?" "I'm just curious." "Man, nothing good. You cram a few thousand poor and black folks together 9 miles outside the city where no one's paying attention. Use your imagination. This was in the Cold War, mind you. Hell, them towers even look right out of Leningrad. You see that? Well, and who you think took in all them Germans running the experiments in the camps? Us? We damn sure didn't shoot enough of them, that's all I know. Do you think they were spraying you with radiation? He plucked a hollow-sounding lick on his guitar. All I know is the government never done nothing out of the kindness of their hearts for any man who looked like me. Not that I ever saw. Don't know the meaning of the word. Look at the treaties they signed with the Indians. You see my mule anywhere? That night he went to the library, his heart pounding, determined to ask Katie on a date. He'd been struck with a rare bout of overconfidence and was intent to seize on the moment before it passed back into second-guessing and general despondency. But when he entered the library, the faces he found behind the circulation desk were to him strange and meaningless, part of the background fuzz of the world. Katie was not working. Michael was walking down a wide indoor thoroughfare, half walking, half floating, as if the ground were moving beneath his feet, propelling him forward. And yet, for as long as he walked, he made no apparent progress. The cavernous corridor showed no signs of ending, showed hardly any sign of difference or diversion in the slightest, which might have indicated a discernible distance traveled. He was in the underground, though he had no recollection of this area, and was struggling even as he walked to retrace his steps in his mind back to the entrance or to any familiar landmark. There were people all around him, shuffling in the same direction, driftless ragmen and huddled families. But as he walked, their number thinned, and soon their presence faded to his rear, and he was alone. Still he walked. Then, suddenly, the walls on either side were receding, and the corridor opened up into a sprawling casino. Cobwebs hung from the slot machines, cold and silent, and the dust on the craps tables must have been half an inch thick. He kept walking and passed beneath a grand chandelier. The walls were lined with mirrors, now so murky and dim that his relentless march forward was the only thing to distinguish his form from that of the penny slots standing roughly his same height. Some sort of phantom. Soon the hall narrowed once more to its former form. Ludlow was speaking on the intercom.
Never forget the creek, my children. Never forget the Sioux. Never forget the Iroquois, or the Algonquin, or the Cherokee. If the Choctaw, the Comanche, should perish from your memory, then just as surely will you perish from this earth, and their fate will be yours. No without proof of ownership of at least 2 houses. Once upon a time, there were 40 acres set aside for you out there. Enough room for a man's dignity to breathe. No more. They decided that was too much. They decided that was theirs too. You can pay them $2,000 a month for the rest of your life for the privilege of taking up the space and be grateful to do so. Never for a second think that there is a floor of sadism or indifference which at deep enough depths are indistinguishable, beneath which they will not sink gleefully in the blink of an eye. If teacher tells them to sing, they say, how low? Look to your brother, the Indian. Your very existence is an affront to them the moment that there is no longer a nickel to be bled from you. You are breathing oxygen which can better be enjoyed by their schnauzers. The slaughter of the red man in this country is not a tragedy because he was a perfect person, as the liberal imagines him to be. Not because he was innocent, not because he did not make war. On the contrary, he was capable of extraordinary violence and cruelty beyond comprehension. It is a tragedy because he represented, in the simplest terms, something else. Another way of living and of living amongst each other, guided by something human, something besides profit and suicidal so-called rationalism. The bomb ought to have killed rationalism. It's all led to a little button somewhere that ends the species and most life on Earth when pressed. And it's in the hands of the same jumped-up Scotch-Irish hillbillies they sent foaming at the mouth into Ohio and Kentucky and Tennessee to clear alcohol holes. Did Chekhov have anything to say about buttons? Alas, it did not, and now rationalism seems destined to kill us, because whatever was in the European that drove them across the ocean, and across the Alleghenies, and the plains, the Rockies, and the desert, was all consuming. It could not tolerate anything existing outside of itself. The red man was a candle flame of humanity in the prairie night, clinging against cackling winds to its wick, holding on beneath the ceaseless onslaught of the machine, the alien brain parasite, the bug, which had by then commandeered the mind of every white man. You killed 10 of them on a Monday, and 15 more showed up on Friday. If the America of the Indian appeared to the European interloper as some new Garden of Eden, he and his wife Adam and Eve in clay, it is only because the Christians had strayed so far from God and sank so deeply into themselves and their own petty delusion. Those above bring war down upon your heads every day, as surely as they shit and piss, and they will never, ever relent. It is a matter of simple survival to hurl it back.
A long silence. Sparkling, sparkling static filled the air.
They claim to be Christian, but make no mistake. city to publicly sacrifice them, crucify them to the God of capitalism. And our priests, the economists, tell us it is all well. It is the natural order of things. They are the awful. A country full of little tyrants and their self-important fiefdoms. Every Cracker Barrel franchise and ski-doo dealership, an empire within an empire. And even more numerous still, the peasants in their hovels, wish-casting over glowing orbs, aspiring to become little tyrants themselves. Look around you. This is a rational society. This is the most rationalized and optimized of all possible worlds. Genocide, endless war, people sleeping on sidewalks. When you allow yourself to be run by bureaucrats, you become a number on a spreadsheet. Keep voting. I suppose every now and then you'll get a goody two-shoes, a real character who somehow manages to maintain her gosh golly through the muck and mire, and steam hitting iron gears, mashing and mashing of it all. A teacher's pet who will really truly in her heart of hearts believe in balancing out that spreadsheet in the most sensible and reasonable way possible. Look at our friend Mayor Halterman. Look where he started. Look where he has led us. They love him. He lies to you. They love him all the more for it. It may be the glistening pearl at the center of their love for him. Follow me, if you will indulge me, in a small exercise. It's really quite simple, I promise. I find that it helps to center the mind. Imagine yourself the first human, Homo sapien prime, probably still hairy as all get out, right? Just barely not in age. Standing in a field somewhere in Africa, the trees are swaying in the distance, heat waves on the horizon. The last glimmer of last night's moon, way overhead. Maybe a big cat somewhere in the distance in the tall grass. Not distant enough, am I right? Alright. Feel the wind on your face. As if it were blown out of an oven. And the sun is only going higher. Breathe in. Touch the grass. Now tell me, what is more real to you? Because remember, at the end of the day, this is all there is, really. When you clear away the bullshit and distractions with which we fill our lives, the wind, the sky, the soil between your hairy toes, It's almost as if, to the outside observer, we are no longer even chasing some great wealth or abundance, but running blindly ahead like madmen, trying to outpace the yawning black chasm nipping ever nearer at our heels, which has been there ever since we killed God in mystery. And the only way we know how to propel ourselves forward is to find another endangered species of seal for the meat grinder, for the fuel. It's not terribly efficient, but it's the best we've ever managed. We reached the end of the rainbow a long time ago, and sure enough, there was a pot of gold there. But no happiness or answers. Nothing so spiritually choice as the divine right of kings, or even 70 virgins arching their backs like black cats on Halloween. And it turns out they already had warehouses full of gold. So they just kept making the number go up, trying to top their own high scores. And now we build cheat codes, shortcuts, pollution factories producing pollution because production makes the number grow like an aggressive cancer. Shrine to our rationality and ability to cheat God as nature. You ask me if we live in a simulation. Of course we do, dummy. Use your eyes. It's right in front of your face. Money, it's all made up. Make believe. All there is you and the sky and the air in your lungs. The cat creeping closer in the grass. And we live our whole lives, generation upon generation, from birth to death, constructing, believing, and maintaining illusions and illusions built atop that reality you try to deny it. Even if you were actually sedated in a pocket somewhere, so what? What's one more layer? What's one more lie?
Michael awoke. It was morning. He was in bed. The tuxedo cat from Ludlow's office was curled on the pillow beside his head. Michael suppressed a scream. Karen. The cat stared at him with narrowed green eyes. Michael went to the kitchen and filled a bowl with milk and opened a can of tuna. He spent the better part of the day racked with angst, for he could not, no matter how hard he concentrated on the matter, decide conclusively whether the previous night's venture into the underground had been a dream. He experienced it first as a photo on the internet. The algorithm showed him the article based on his search history, key phrases spoken within range of a network-connected microphone, and his recent travel patterns. Barrett Sanger condemned. Subhead: City's last public housing deemed unlivable amidst health concerns. The photo which led the article was almost as stark as it was plain. A twin bed, sheets turned down and messy. Pink lace-lined curtains in the background, half-drank glass of tepid water on the nightstand. There was a black mark on the white pillow. Michael could feel every drop of icy blood trickle through his veins. It wasn't the first time that Sandra Pollock, a 27-year-old resident of the Barrett Sanger housing complex, had been woken in the middle of the night by her young daughter, Kaylee. I think I was still half asleep the first time she said it, but I woke up quick. I had to make her say it like 3 times because it wasn't making any sense in my head. Was it a bad dream that brought Kaylee, who will be entering kindergarten in the fall, to her mother's bedside just after midnight Tuesday morning? and upset stomach. She said, "Mama, I had a worm in my mouth." The next photo was of a bathroom sink, a toothbrush resting in a cup on the ledge. There was a small lumpy pile of nubworms in the basin, as though they'd spilled from the tap. Michael could hear it. He felt hot nausea rising in his chest, his ears aflame. She told me, "Mama, it was trying to go inside the hole where my tooth fell out." Michael visited the library several times over the next few weeks. Katie was never in. Eventually, he asked one of the other librarians if she'd quit or been fired. They said no. They did not elaborate. The house was more overgrown than it had ever been, and it still frightened Michael a bit to approach the property whenever he came home late at night. He thought about hiring a landscaper, but he had not yet received the rest of his payment. He dialed the number on the business card that the man had given him in the diner. How long did it normally take to build a pair of skyscrapers full of luxury condos? Nobody answered. He thought of Katie often, very often. He ran his tongue through the space where his tooth used to be and thought about what he would do with his parents' house. But in every other moment, it seemed, whenever his mind was not specifically occupied by something else, he thought of Ludlow. He reread the books and stories, and the man's words rang about inside his head as if it were a great bell. Like liquid foam, Ludlow had seeped in and filled the gaps in his consciousness, the folds in his brain, and was now beginning to expand. Before long, he returned to the underground. There was a buzz about the place that had not been there before. Michael saw a few people, but heard murmurs and whispers around corners and in shadowy alcoves. The atmosphere seemed almost to crackle and made the hairs on his neck stand on end. He followed the growing anticipation to an ice rink. The ice was long melted and the bleachers were full. Hundreds of people. Michael decided to wait for whatever they were waiting for. Eventually, a large and familiar gray-headed figure entered the arena. The venue grew so quiet that he did not even need a microphone. "My children, I thank you for your faith and devotion. I love you for your enthusiasm. But he seemed to be struggling against himself. Today, I must apologize. Our mission remains unchanged in its purity, unchanged in its righteousness. But events have transpired." He struggled to force the words from his mouth. "And at this time, I cannot, in good conscience, lead you on this crusade." Some in the crowd gasped. "At least not today." With that, the author departed. Nobody else moved. Michael tracked him back to the dressing room, where he found him sitting on the floor in the showers, his massive head obscured in deep shadow. He did not look up when Michael entered. "Do you know a man named Lance Adelson?" His voice echoed around the tiled walls. "He was my agent. For 20 years, I was at his kid's first birthday. He was the one who convinced me to start writing true crime. His sigh in the dark sent a shiver down Michael's spine. And you know something else. It's the damnedest thing. I just found out that he spent his entire career employed by the Central Intelligence Agency. Michael said nothing. Ludlow chuckled, and soon his chuckle became a roaring laugh, so loud and booming and primal that it activated Michael's fight-or-flight response. I've spent my entire career terrifying people on their behalf, stoking their fear and fanning their paranoia, softening the population, priming them to accept their solutions, sowing madness and distrust until they demanded them. He looked up at Michael now. A stray beam of light caught his eye. I don't understand. Ludlow's massive hands masked his face as he rubbed his temples. I can't do it. I know. And I do mean no. That it remains the only moral course of action, as it ever was. But you can understand, can't you? If it's them that's behind it, somehow, even if only through some convoluted linkage of causation, how the whole line of thinking, the whole endeavor is irrevocably poisoned. You understand my hesitation? The shirking of my heavenly duty? Michael swallowed. Even Jesus had some doubts at the end, I think, right? Ludlow smirked. Michael felt forced to continue. The Red Sox traded Babe Ruth to the Yankees, you know. I just mean, you know, they're not omnipotent. Getting us to think they are is half their strategy. They mess up. Never interrupt your opponent while he's making a mistake. A tiger pit could look like an opening from the right perspective. Michael's stomach felt strange. His mind could hardly comprehend what the mouth was advocating for. What? Do you think there's a rat? The author shrugged. No rat. Or maybe there is. Who knows? The notion to do the thing was a product of my own mind. Nobody whispered it into my ear. That I know of, anyhow. The bugs in our gut tell us what and when to eat. How can any of us ever really know for certain where any of our thoughts come from? Knowing all we know about them. About the Lance Adelsons of the world. Subliminal messages, liminal messages, drugs in the water, poison in your food. They own the airwaves and they write the news. Where do you end and they begin? If they'd done only everything they've admitted to, they're Dr. fucking Mengele and an Uncle Sam top hat. If they've done 10% of what they're rumored to have, they're goddamn wizards. Doesn't matter. They're inside your head already. And they ain't leaving. You'll spend the rest of your life seeing ghosts in every shadow. They're watching you even when they're not. I don't understand, though, said Michael. Why? Terrorism. You know? Why not your art? You reach a lot of people. My boy. Ludlow raised his head so that the stroke of light caught his front teeth. He was grinning. What other art is left to us? Spectacle, son. Spectacle. It's a media event. Where are the cameras? What are your angles? Where do you place your extras? Can the good people watching from home hear the bombs? AK-47s or something more Western? How do you make people pay attention? They heard the dressing room door open, well back in the antechambers of that deep and desolate linoleum cave. They heard no one enter, and after some time, the door shut. Look around you. Do you see very much sublime art being made? I tell you, all devouring is all devouring. Anything that cannot be made to serve the God of profit cannot last. And when they've wrung every stone upon the land dry, they'll come for what's inside you next. For beauty, for love. Among the ancients, there were medicine men, shamans, queer, frightful aberrants, but respected in their tribes. They recognized that whatever this peculiarity may be rooted in, its gift was perspective. Its gift was sight. And an insight into how one ought to live his or her life. Where are our shamans, our seers, our guides, witch doctors and prophets? I tell you, their brains were bought and paid for before they knew the meaning of consent, nor even the word for it. Any others are rotting away in madhouses, what ones there are left. Those who cannot be molded and redirected are left to howl on the streets. Those with access to the other side wandering the wastelands of this one, where we respond with violent retching to the mere suggestion that there even is any such thing as another side. Our poets are animated like puppets by the string. They preen and posture only to feed us an anesthetizing goop. Where once art was expected, some truth, some great beauty, there is only a hollow sucking void, a bottomless desire to be pacified whilst we are drained dry. A tortured and exhausted population stand ever vigilant at their trough. What else is there? They've taken everything else from them that wasn't nailed down. Man is utterly convinced ours is the only intelligence. If you can persuade him of his own freedom, he will do anything for you. Just ask the wheat. Sparsely found on a younger earth, growing in patches here or there in a few locales until it found us, until it domesticated us. Trained those up-jumped monkeys, those hunting, gathering nomads to plant it in straight lines, bent us to its needs, and taught us to defy our physiology and break our backs harvesting it, to wake at dawn, to leave his bed and his family to care for and cultivate it. Convinced them to give up a life of traveling wherever they fancied, eating whatever they pleased, fucking wherever they felt so moved, in order to serve it. To become farmers, and now it coats 9/10 of this godforsaken planet. He pulled a flask from somewhere on his person and drank deeply. Makes decent whiskey, though. He finished it. The psychiatrist and his arrival have been naught but one long unfolding disaster for the human race. In a vain power play, he muscles out religion and leaves man a bundle of neuroses without answers, medicalizes all madness, trivializes it. If even 1 in every 10,000 declared mad is a prophet, well, if you can convince the Jews that Jesus is crazy or unstable or off his meds, then you've already won, haven't you? Was John Brown a madman? His conviction was undoubtedly religious. The most moral man in American history, sane or insane, at the end of the day doesn't matter. He answered his calling. He turned the wheel of history. And which side looks sane now, looking back? He could have fled, but he made himself a symbol. He went to the gallows in a state of grace. He was a martyr, said Michael, but Lenin, Castro, those guys won. His own voice seemed foreign and almost frightening in the dark. Symbols are powerful, but they're not winning. Ludlow was silent for a long time then. Are you sure you're not a magazine writer? He tried another swig of the flask, grunted, and tossed it. It slid along the floor and crashed into a metal locker. Mr. Ludlow, said Michael, you're not the one killing those women, are you? No, he said to the tiles. But I do think that the killer is among them. Really? Said Michael. Maybe several of them, said the author. But I would never tell that to anyone. They'd never understand. Deep down, on some level, it would just confirm what they've always known. That there's good reason behind the order of things, and inherent morality. But morals have shit all to do with it. It comes down to simple math. The fact is, if you treat people like animals long enough, eventually they're going to try to bite your hand. Michael was crammed into a canoe with perhaps a dozen others. He was not dreaming. They were part of a flotilla with a dozen other small craft like theirs, though Michael had to take their continued existence on faith in the perfect darkness of the tunnel. A failure in the construction behind one of the screens in the megaplex had revealed a section of the old subway abutting the entertainment complex, which had only operated for 3 years in the 1920s. Before the planning engineer's failure to properly find and account for the water table forced the city to abandon the dream when the necessary pump system became too expensive to maintain. In the 1930s, the big department stores and several other businesses along the route installed loading docks beneath their basements and used gondolas in the flooded tunnels to transport larger goods and avoid street traffic. A deal was struck with city officials, and such commercial use of the tunnels was never publicly or officially acknowledged. The rise of the shopping mall in the suburbs killed enough of the downtown businesses to render the tunnels non-viable, and in the 90s, the city quietly bricked up all of the entrances to the system. There were sporadic kerplunks and other watery noises to convince Michael's imagination that there was something down there, swimming alongside them. Someone in another boat was muttering in a language he did not recognize. A prayer. All else was silence. For all Michael knew, they floated through some great subterranean cathedral. They glided upriver for nearly an hour. In the dark, it felt like 5. There was strained breathing emanating from behind him, and after a few minutes he could not reliably distinguish whether it was inside of his head or without. He continually padded most of the length of his person, unconsciously, eyes fixed straight ahead, like a blind man. If he did not, he would lose track of his physical form, an accounting of where all his cells were and where they ended, and where the darkness began. If he did not, he would simply melt into the darkness. A bell was ringing in his ears, as if the silence were so heavy and so concentrated in his ear canals that it had produced a diamond of tone. When Ludlow broke it, Michael felt as though he'd slipped halfway out of the world and was waist-deep in some steaming stew of madness, like the author had intruded upon some deep, occluded part of him that he'd summoned for communion. His voice seemed to emerge from the black water, and the stony echo placed his words, spoken barely above a whisper, inches from Michael's ear, so seemingly close that he was surprised he could not smell the man's breath. He shuddered.
November 11th, the year 2000. Copland, Austria. A ski resort. 161 souls board a train through a tunnel 1.5 miles long into the mountain to the top of the slopes. A little space heater one of the operators had brought on board quietly catches fire in the back and quickly burns through a hydraulic hose. Halfway up the tunnel, the train loses power. As the lights go out, the train car fills with black smoke and the smell of melting plastic. The automatic doors would not open. The windows were made out of shatterproof glass. The ones who passed out were lucky. A few folks escaped with a man who happened to be a volunteer firefighter when they managed to break a window using a ski pole. Even amidst the chaos, he recognized something. The tunnel was now a blast furnace. He led his small party toward and past the flames and down to safety. They were not many. The smoke rose and filled the station at the top of the mountain, killing several more. Those who fled left the doors open, fanning the flames below. When finally the conductor managed to pry open the door, all of the survivors began a nearly mile-long trek in the dark to the top. None made it. 155 perished that day.
The boat bumped the one ahead of it. Michael nearly leapt from his seat.
All of that is to say that the apocalypse is always happening somewhere. There is a God, 1,000,000 times more terrible and leering and sadistic than any man ever has or could invent or discard. It lives in the space between the stars, the darkness, dark matter, the stuff you can't see. You just have to have faith. They say trust science, but sometimes they slip and let on and say something like believe science. We can cure disease, some of it anyway. Fly across the country in 4 hours, that's wonderful. We could do it in half the time, but ask the folks in Oklahoma how they liked 50 planes a day breaking the sound barrier in the skies right above their heads. But as the physicists probe deeper and deeper, looking for bedrock, they find themselves dropped into a bottomless pit, some eldritch subterranean cave of unknown size or proportion. Even the echoes of their own shouts have about a 1 in a trillion chance at finding their way back to them. They invent impossible particles to explain the gaps in their theories. Even cause and effect, the world as we know it has no discernible domain when you drill deep enough. We exist atop a monopoly board, balanced above an abyss on a tall pole, which can scarcely carry the weight as it is. And the weight of our ego and delusions grows daily to keep pace with the contradictions in our lives. The blankness between the stars stares back at us even during the daytime, with eyes ours cannot even comprehend. The pieces are there, but our brains are incapable of congealing them into an image of the true horror that lives there, for our own sanity, sneering at us. We who figured out lenses and invented microscopes and telescopes and considered ourselves enlightened, swept away millennia of human experience and wisdom and spiritual reality and found ourselves standing on air above a deep canyon, having run past the edge of the cliff 5 steps ago like Wile E. Coyote. God isn't down there to catch us. The very earth which birthed and nurtured us isn't there, and in fact has been made an alien hostile force to be raped and subdued. Patricide, matricide. We killed the pagan. We even killed the policeman in our head. And now look at us, the rebellious teen runaway, free of all responsibility except to his or her own hedonistic animal fetishes, whatever the amygdala desires in this moment, loosed of all ties of blood, of institution, of even simple neighborliness, floating along in the deepest, darkest part of the ocean, where not one of your senses is worth a damn thing, with nothing but your own infallible rationality for company. Soon enough, the world will awake from their slumber to find that they are swimming into the waiting jaws of whatever that thing is which laughs at us from the darkness.
A flashlight beam leapt from non-existence, straight up like a beacon, and highlighted a manhole cover set into the ceiling of the tunnel. The boat behind Michael bumped softly into their stern. A minute passed, then another. The cover was removed. The pinhole sky was like a sun, something introduced upon a universe of nothing, light intruding upon an eternal darkness. When their eyes adjusted, they could see the tops of the trees cutting into the blueness of the sky, bobbing in the wind, the softness of the clouds hustling by. The silhouette of a head like an eclipse over the tunnel sun, looking down on them. Then it was gone, and the rope ladder came tumbling down. Michael watched as they were raptured from the boat ahead of him, one by one, ascending in silence save for the creaking of the ropes and knots. Then it was his turn. He emerged into a forest, the birds chirping, red pine needles carpeting the earth. He climbed out of a concrete mound, waist-high, covered in moss and vines, and found himself amongst the trees and those passengers of the first boat, blinking like raccoons. Another boat came up behind him, a detachment of some 30-odd people, charged with first causing a distraction, while Pax and his team planted the charges, and then with setting up and securing a perimeter around the mayoral mansion once Pax and company had secured the target. The author led his disciples into those most banal halls of power. They entered through a maintenance access point in the mailroom, where 50 police and a SWAT team were waiting. The first boat disembarked, and as the second was pulling under the ladder, they moved in, surrounding Pax and his men. 29 officers perished when the author detonated the plastic explosives he was carrying, as well as 6 people who were working around the building. A dozen acolytes were killed. The mayor, as it turned out, was miles away, recording a podcast about his favorite albums of all time. When the survivors returned to the underground, they found scorch marks on the walls, broken glass, bullet holes in the ceiling. Tents torn to shreds by automatic gunfire, fresh blood smeared on the floors and splattered across directories. The police had raided the place to ensure that renovations would be allowed to begin on schedule. It was after dark when Michael arrived home, and his parents' house had never appeared more foreboding, as though it would swallow him whole. There was no check in the mailbox. The man from the diner's number was disconnected. Michael would not see him again for many years. And then, only as a giant face in the sky, dead-eyed billboard smile above Route 83, running for Congress. He did not make the connection right away, only knew that he knew the guy from somewhere. It clicked in his sleep a few nights later, and he woke up drenched in cold sweat. He stripped down, but the shower was not working. He tried the kitchen sink, and when he turned the faucet, the house belched, but no water was forthcoming. In the morning, he called the water services for the city, but they had no record of disconnecting his service. He was paid up in full. When he hung up with them, he called a plumber. Sometime between 2 and 7. Michael had nowhere to be. The plumber did not arrive until 8:30, and then seemed in a hurry to get home, as if he were doing Michael some great favor just by being there. He showed him to the kitchen, where all of the cleaning supplies from under the sink had been sitting on the floor for the past 7 hours. Without so much as a glance back at him, the plumber set to his task, leaden work boots crashing laconically across the tile. Puzzled by what he found, he eased himself back into a squat to investigate, hiking up 30 pounds of tools hanging from his belt as he went. He stroked his chin and grunted. 2 minutes later, he was on his back, having removed a section of pipe, but still struggling to approach any kind of diagnosis. It's almost like something's just blocking it up, something farther back in the line. The house retched. Then, with a chesty glurp, a slop of worms issued forth and fell with a wet slap on the plumber's face. He gagged, and his knees jerked up into his chest. He slapped at his face with both hands. One landed on his chest, the blank white field of his undershirt. Those few seconds for Michael seemed to fill the space of a minute, an eternity. The plumber kicked out from beneath the sink and lumbered to his feet, spitting air and swiping at his torso. His whole body heaved, and his eyes bulged, and his hand went to cover his mouth. He ran for the bathroom. Michael heard the toilet lid flip up. He heard the man screaming, pure primal terror. But his attention was entirely fixed on the worm which lay on the floor at his feet. There was a hypnotic poetry to its movement. It expelled a semi-viscous substance across the floor before it. Michael was reminded of a river delta viewed from low orbit, or an old film one of his science teachers had shown once in class, of a lone neuron viewed through a microscope, grasping out blindly into the world around it, little tendrils looking for any connection, branching out and mapping the space as it goes. As a prey animal, Michael understood instinctually. The worm was hunting, writhing, squirming. It dragged itself forward, as if the excrement were one of those sticky rubber hand toys which come as children's party favors. Closer and closer toward his toes, a seemingly bottomless well of will and energy. Down the hall, 10,000 miles away, in a foreign language from another world, the plumber is screaming.
John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave.
John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, but his soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. But his soul goes marching on. The stars above in heaven are looking kindly down. The stars above in heaven are looking kindly down. The stars above in heaven are looking kindly down on the grave of old John Brown. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on. He captured Harper's Ferry with his 19 men so true. He frightened old Virginia till she trembled through and through. They hanged him for a traitor, they themselves the traitor crew. His soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on. Well, he's gone to be a soldier in the army of the Lord. He's gone to be a soldier in the army of the Lord. He's gone to be a soldier in the army of the Lord, but his soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on. Mine eyes hath seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath is stored. He's loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on.
It wasn't the type of car you normally saw on Winston Street, certainly not this far south, certainly not slowing down, and absolutely never rolling down their window. Middle-aged man inside, sunglasses and slicked hair. The one he's pointing at, out his passenger window, is John Robles, though nobody has called him that in years. He's Hey John. That's what folks are always saying when he's around, Hey John, and plenty of folks do know him, and some real folk too, not just his peers. Dick Wiley, who owns the donut store a few blocks over, knows him, and in the winter when it gets cold, he'll sell him a large coffee for a small price so that he'll be able to stay in the store for a little while longer. Catherine Mitchell, down at the Maud, lets him sweep up after closing for a free beer. You strung one day to the next. Some folks could be decent, long as you knew how to make yourself scarce now and then. You moved around often enough that nobody got to know your face around where you were sleeping, or trying to. Tonight, it's between a gutted ATM and a garbage bin that hasn't seen service in probably 5 years, buried beneath a slouching mountain of plastic shopping bags stretched transparent by some ominous weight, in the vestibule of what he thinks was last a hat store going by the shadows baked years ago onto the back wall of the display case by a relentless barrage of 4:30 p.m. sun. He sometimes wondered who the last person to put a piece of garbage on that obscene pile was. Who was the first to say, "I think this one is full"? "You," said the man in the sunglasses. He was looking right at Hey John. He sat up on one elbow. His ratty red blanket had little left to give in cushioning him from the concrete. "Get in the car," he said. "Excuse me?" "I'd like to take you for lunch, my treat." There were sleeping bags up and down the sidewalk for the length of the underpass. Hello? Sure, why not? If this guy wanted to get his Good Samaritan points for the day, rich guy on his lunch break, why not him? The door slammed shut. The inside of the car was as black as the outside. They drove out of the city and neither man said anything. Hey John wondered, but did not question. What else did he have to be doing? Still, they were going a long way. The man had never said anything about where they would be getting lunch, but this was beginning to stretch any reasonable expectations attached to the phrase. Lunchtime became the middle of the afternoon. Tall buildings and narrow store-lined streets became strip malls and parking lots. He turned into a business park, a maze of loading docks and concrete bunker office fronts, black-tinted windows and vertical blinds. Finally, Hey John cleared his throat and spoke. Where are we going to eat? The man glanced over at him. What would you like? What? I asked what you wanted to get for lunch. What do you mean? Where have you been driving to this whole time? He pulled into one of those anonymous little parking lots, parked and turned off the car and turned to Hey John with a smile. Shall we? He unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped outside. Unsure of what else to do, Hey John followed. The man flipped through his key ring until he found the one that would let them into the office. Inside it was dark and evidently unoccupied. The desks and cubicle dividers were blank, the rolling chairs all covered in a layer of dust. He did not turn on the lights, led Hey John down a series of hallways and through a break room kitchen into a storage bay. Hey John's legs carried him deeper and deeper into the bowels of the behemoth, his mind blank. Maybe there was food. At this point it seemed unlikely, but whatever was happening, it was something that was happening, something besides concrete on his ass. Day after day, 1,000 pairs of legs walking by in a day. The sun sets and maybe if you're lucky you get a bit of sleep and somehow you wake up and do it over again. His tooth hurting a little more every day. Empty apocalyptic diners with ghostly windows, iron security bars in front of a payday loan place that closed 9 years ago. Piles of excrement on the sidewalks. They hated the mess, but hated even more letting you in anywhere for 5 minutes to take care of it. So he decided he would see where the day took him. Now the man flipped on some lights, a bank of fluorescence overhead which buzzed and took a moment to warm up. The floor was cement, the ceiling very high. The space was divided by chain-link fencing, lined with stacks of cardboard boxes of files. It was no high-class steakhouse. It was not even a Burger King. How much thought have you ever given to your, condition? What do you mean by that? As a human, as an animal intelligence existing on this planet at this moment in time, I suppose the question that I want to place in front of you is, can you really consider yourself to be a human being? Hey John stared at the man who took his sunglasses off now for the first time to examine some speck or stain. His naked eyes seemed small and beady. Consider what happens today if I die, if I drop dead right here on this spot. The police will be here within 20 minutes, a dozen of them or more, with $90,000 squad cars. Ambulance, fire truck, they'll probably want to speak to you too, but that's besides the point. Detectives, journalists, maybe even a few TV cameras and their vans with the big satellites on top. Local business magnate, real estate investor, philanthropist, found dead under mysterious circumstances. More at 5. My grieving family comes to collect me. Next week there's a funeral, attended by 100 people. An obituary, a headstone. Maybe next year they'll plant a tree in my honor, or plaster my name on the wing of a library. In 30 years my kids will tell their kids stories about me. Do you see? Hey John was only half listening. He stared so hard at the man that the muscles around his nose periodically twitched and jumped. Now, if you died, Well, likely you'd get a free ride to the city morgue, the one place you can afford the nightly rate. Then they chuck you in the ground wherever a hole opens up. I bet they'll give you a better box than whatever you're sleeping in now, huh? A couple of signatures on some forms from county employees. The owner of the property would have to hire a company to come clean up whatever mess you'd left. So there you are. You're an annoying phone call interrupting some guy's Saturday afternoon. A mess, a blight, a pile of biohazardous waste on the sidewalk that someone else has to deal with. You're barely even a statistic. You're not counted among any sort of person who gets counted. The best you can hope for is in 5 years you get lumped into an estimate by some well-meaning grad student. Do you see? Hey John sized up his escape routes. There may have been something behind the boxes. Who knew how deep the room went? But the only guaranteed way out he saw was the way they'd come in. And the man had needed a key for that door. Who knew if it had locked behind them? Do you read a lot of history? I love history. Can't get enough of this stuff. You start to realize that some things never change. How alike we are to people who lived 100 years ago, 1,000. But you also realize that in a lot of key ways, the times we live in are very different than anything humans have ever known. You understand? We are very comfortable. Many things which we never experienced would consider to be barbaric, even, were an everyday part of life for most humans who have ever lived. If there's no food, sir, he choked out the words, then I'd like to leave. Please. Point is, I came to the conclusion a long time ago that a person can't ever really be fully human, fully, completely human, with everything that means. Can't ever be said to have experienced the full capacity of your body and your will until you have killed. Hey John walked with firm assurance, but did not run, did not once lose a bit of control of his body, to the door. It was locked. The man was rummaging through a heavy toolbox he'd pulled from one of the shelves. Do you see how I came to this notion? Hunting is all well and fine. We've killed animals to feed ourselves from the time we could digest their flesh. That is all well and fine. But war? War is something deeper, more human. War is competition, all else being equal. A contest of pure will and drive and cunning. There's no war in this warehouse. All animals need to eat. Many hunt and kill. And trust me, he said, dead and heavy metals shifting around his hands. Cats, dogs, they bleed, they die. And there's plenty nobody misses. But to face another man like yourself and triumph over him so that you can take another breath of air while his world goes dark. He shuddered and had to recompose himself. Even modern war is tame, done at a distance. Before gunpowder, how many millions of lives ended in scrums of human bodies, in hand-to-hand combat, face-to-face, two hearts pounding as hard as a human heart can pound. Last moments spent at the bottom of a pile of corpses and men struggling with every fiber of muscle in their bodies not to become one. This, to me, confronting death, seeing its minutiae in the eye of another, is essential. If you want it so bad, I know where a recruitment office is. I can take you there today. Ha! The man laughed. Only once. It echoed. I am worth nearly $1 billion. Don't be a jackass. I ain't fighting you. Oh, they never do. At least not at first. But the body has mechanisms beyond our control. By then it's too late, of course. It's always sad to watch. The mind may be stoic, but the body so rarely obeys. He was still rummaging, considering what was in the box as if he were behind the sneeze guard at an ice cream counter. Sweat ran down Heijon's temples. Finally, he broke. Why are you doing this to me? I don't even know you. Red face, spittle flying. The man shrugged. 'Cause I can. And I want to. Don't you fucking touch me! If you wanted to stop me, you'd have done it 20 years ago. You've got a real job and a mortgage. Now, you don't get a choice. Now, you're a cricket in a pet store. He closed the box and latched it shut. He had found something terrible.
As I went walking the ribbon of highway, saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me the golden valley. Sing it out now. This land was made for you and me. My footsteps to the sparkling sands of her diamond deserts, while all around me a voice was sounding. This land was made for you and me. Everybody, this land is your Some of you are singing just beautiful, but we need a little harmony. All the high tenors and all the basses and the contramezzo sopranos. Everybody got to get in on this. I mean everybody. If there's anybody who's not singing, oh, people say, who are you? Woody wrote a lot of verses that did not get in the school songbooks. Here's one of them. In the squares of the city, by the shadow of the steeple, by the welfare office, I saw my people. As they stood there hungry, I stood there whistling. This land was made for you and me. Sing it out now. This land. Wall there tried to stop me. Was a great big sign there said private property, but on the other side it didn't say nothing. This land was made for you and me. Yes, this I think Woody would be glad to know that people are making up new verses to this all over. I've heard verses in Spanish from New Mexico. Now that's a nice idea. There ought to be verses in French and German and Italian and Polish and Yiddish and Choctaw and Cherokee and Kiowa also. You ever hear this verse? This land is your land, but it once was my land. Before we sold you Manhattan Island, you pushed our nations to the reservations. This land was stole by you from me. Now, there was a friend of mine, a fine young black singer named Jimmy Collier, singing this in Washington, D.C. back in 1968 in the Poor People's Campaign, and we were singing it together. Up comes old Henry Crow Dog from the Sioux Indian delegation. He points his finger right in Jimmy's chest. He says, "Hey, you're both wrong. It belongs to me." Jimmy stopped in the middle of the song. He said, "Maybe we shouldn't be singing this song." But Henry Crow Dog had a great sense of humor. He says, "No, if we're down here together to get something done, let's all sing it. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island. From the redwood forest to the coastal waters. This land was made for you and me. Woodland and grassland and river shoreline, to everything living, bugs and snakes and microbes, fin, fur and feather, we're all here together. That's ecology. This land was made for you and me. One more time, this land